Our presentation will be talking about stereotype threat. So, what exactly is stereotype threat? It is a concept in which individuals feel at risk of conforming to negative stereotypes associated with their group or social identity. This can consist of race, gender, and class. This fear of judgment can impact behavioral and performance outcomes. For example, what stereotypes do you associate with these people? Health nut, egotistical, judgmental, maybe nerdy? Well, when these labels affect our performance in school, performance on memory and cognitive tasks, self-esteem and self-image, and interactions with friends and family, that's stereotype threat in action. Where did the concept of stereotype threat start? Stereotype threat was first defined in a 1995 paper by Aronson and Steele. They conducted a study in which white and black students were given the same test, but framed in two different ways. In the control condition, the test was administered as a problem-solving task. In the threat condition, the test was administered as a diagnostic test of intellectual ability. How did the subtle framing impact the performance of each group? As you can see in the figure, black and white students performed equally when the test was called a problem-solving task. However, calling the test a diagnostic test negatively impacted the performance of black students. This caused the researchers to arrive at a conclusion that referring to a test as diagnostic of ability can decrease performance by creating a sense of being under judgment by a racial stereotype. While most studies about stereotype threat have focused on performance, there are several other neural mechanisms involved. The first is arousal. So, how exactly is arousal measured? High arousal levels occur in people exhibiting a stress response, which is mediated by the secretion of cortisol from adrenal glands, which are located on top of the kidneys. A study was conducted to answer two central questions. Does arousal play a significant role in stereotype threat, and how does it affect performance on different types of tasks? According to the social facilitation theory, if arousal plays a role in stereotype threat, then stereotyped individuals under threat will do better on an easy task, but worse on a difficult task in comparison to individuals in the no threat condition. In this study, women were told they would be taking a math test. However, the real tasks administered were a well-learned or easy task to write their name in cursive 20 times, or a difficult task to write their name backwards in cursive 20 times. Before beginning the task, women in the control condition were not primed. Women in the threat condition were told a negative stereotype about their gender and math ability beforehand. The figure shows that women under the threat condition performed significantly better on the easy task, while women in the control condition did better on the more difficult task. This study concluded that arousal plays a significant role in mediating stereotype threat. The next mechanism is negative cognitions and dejection. To assess the effects of negative cognitions and dejection, an fMRI study was conducted to measure the brain activity of women while completing a math exercise during the presence and absence of stereotype threat. Women in both control and threat conditions first performed a baseline math test. Women in the threat condition were then reminded of the negative stereotype regarding women and math performance. Then, women in both conditions completed the second math exercise. What did they find out? fMRI results showed that women in the control condition showed enhanced activation in the inferior prefrontal cortex, the angular gyrus, and the left inferior parietal cortex. These are all regions associated with math learning and performance. Women in the threat condition, who had been reminded of their stereotyped inferiority, did not show high activation in those regions. Instead, they showed enhanced activation in the ventral anterior cingulate cortex, which is linked to emotional self-regulation and the processing of social feedback. From this study, we can conclude that stereotype threat affects women's performance in two ways. First, it disrupts normal recruitment of cognitive areas required for high math performance, and second, it increases recruitment of areas that regulate and process emotions. Stereotype threat also operates by interfering with our working memory. Stereotype threat can increase worries and concerns, which can reduce the working memory capacity we need to perform a task. Anxious thoughts caused by stereotype threat interfere with the activation of the prefrontal cortex, the inferior frontal gyrus, and neural circuits that interact at the sylvian fissure, which are all components of the working memory system that also control both inner speech and thinking.
So now I'm going to talk about some of the other ways stereotype can affect individuals and describe the neural mechanisms involved. Stereotype threat has been shown to negatively impact self-control, which is widely thought to require the use of limited mental resources. Engaging in effortful cognitive tasks, such as suppressing thoughts and emotions, can deplete these resources and leave a person with less resources to exert self-control. Stress can also affect self-control, since many ways of dealing with stress demand the use of the same resources. So what is the link between self-control and stereotype threat? Research suggests that individuals under threat of a negative stereotype may need to spend more mental resources with coping with the stress of a stereotype, leaving them with less resources to engage in tasks that require focus and self-control. Thus, individuals faced with stereotype threat may have difficulty directing their attention and regulating their thoughts when performing cognitively demanding tasks because of this depletion of resources caused by stereotype-induced stress. Self-control is thought to rely on two separate neural systems. The conflict monitoring system, or error detection system, monitors ongoing behavior and detects discrepancies between intended and actual responses. The regulatory system then recruits top-down control processes, such as attention, to correct these discrepancies and implement the intended response, while suppressing the unwanted one. Converging evidence from neuroimaging studies shows that these systems are supported by the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex. The anterior cingulate cortex plays an important role in monitoring performance and signaling when intentional and control processes are needed to regulate behavior. Self-control failure can also occur when self-regulatory resources are used inefficiently, and this type of failure is also reflected in activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. In one study, male and female subjects were told that they would be given a genuine test of math intelligence and were then given 15 minutes to complete a difficult math test. Afterwards, they were given a Stroop task. In this task, subjects are asked to name the printed color of a word. In low-conflict trials, the color of the word and the word itself are congruent, or the word was not related to the name of a color. In high-conflict trials, the word was a name of a color, but the font color was incongruent with the name of the color. For example, the word green would be shown in a color other than green. Since subjects must inhibit a natural tendency to read the word itself, rather than the color of the word, in order to correctly perform this task can be used to assess attentional control and self-regulation. EEG activity was then recorded while participants were engaged in the Stroop task. The experimenters found that female subjects exposed to a stereotype threat showed increased anterior cingulate cortex activity during all trials, despite performing worse on the Stroop test compared to subjects that were not threatened by a stereotype. In fact, in stereotype-threatened subjects, neural activity was higher for low-conflict congruent trials than high-conflict incongruent trials, indicating that these subjects were inefficiently expending their cognitive resources on tasks that required less attention. Thus, stereotype threat can impair self-regulation by causing an individual to inefficiently use up cognitive resources on unneeded performance monitoring. Other studies have shown that a heightened state of vigilance induced by a stereotype threat can also decrease performance on tasks that require creativity, openness, flexibility, and speed. In this state, subjects become averse to loss and failure and show increased bias in attention towards negative stimuli. This state appears to be correlated with increased activity in the amygdala, anterior cingulate cortex, and thalamus. So what can we do about stereotype threat? One practical and feasible way is to consider moving questions related to ethnicity and gender to the end of standardized tests. These kinds of questions may prime stereotype vulnerable individuals to recall negative stereotypes regarding their group identities, which, as we have seen, can negatively impact their test performance. Several studies have shown that female participants scored significantly higher on an AP calculus test when demographic inquiries related to gender and ethnicity appeared at the end of a test rather than at the beginning. In addition, explaining why anxiety and indistraction may occur due to prevalent stereotypes and ensuring individuals that negative stereotypes are unrelated to their ability to succeed on a task can also help reduce the effects of a stereotype. One group of researchers found that doing just that eliminated the negative effects of stereotype threat on the math performance of female participants. An example of another technique that may reduce the effects of stereotype threat is encouraging individuals to think of themselves as complex and multifaceted. In one study, women who were encouraged to think of themselves in terms of their valued and unique characteristics were less likely to experience stereotype threat in the context of a math test. In this presentation, we introduced stereotype threat and showed examples of how it can negatively affect individuals in a variety of ways. We have discussed some of the neurocorrelates of stereotype threat. Finally, we offered some ways to address and reduce stereotype threat. This concludes the end of our presentation. Thank you.